Hey everyone, Tim Crawford with Avoa here, and today I'm in Munich, Germany at the NiCE Cognigy Nexus 2026 event. Cognigy is a company that NiCE had acquired last year. I wrote a little bit about the acquisition back in July, and you can get to that post here using the QR code. Um, Cognigy is an agentic AI platform for conversational AI specifically. And what that means is that they're able to bridge that gap between how customers interact with the companies, but also starting to bring in the human component as well as the digital component into that customer exchange. Um, NiCE had acquired the company, announced the acquisition of the company back in July of 2025. We got to see a little bit more about Cognigy and what they're doing at the Analyst Summit in Vienna last fall, which was great. It was really interesting to see how they're approaching AI. Because when you look at each of the different folks in the contact center space and how they're thinking about AI, how it's really going to differentiate their company, but more importantly, how it's going to benefit their customers. Each of the core companies are taking very different approaches to this. Cognigy is no slouch to enterprise customers. If you look at their customer list, it's impressive. They have companies like Lufthansa Group, Bosch, DHL, Sky, Fabletics, Deutsche Telekom, just to mention a few of the big names. So this isn't a short list of a couple of companies that they have been able to bring on board, but they've done some really kind of interesting work with these companies, and these companies are using this technology as a way to catapult and change the dynamics of the interactions they have with customers. Phil Heltewig, who is the CEO or was the CEO of Cognigy and one of the co-founders, he's now the chief AI officer at NiCE. Started us off yesterday and was talking about kind of how they've evolved and gave us a few stats so we could kind of see how they've been performing over the last year or so. Just in 2025 alone, they had over 2 billion interactions. I mean, that is a lot of interactions to be able to work with. And what's interesting about that is not just the interactions themselves, but just imagine the data that they can then leverage and their customers can leverage from those interactions. They also saw a 500% increase in agentic deployments in 2025 alone, which again is just another metric, impressive growth for Cognigy. The deal is now closed. NiCE is looking at how they can leverage it, with the CX1 platform and taking the AI components and marrying it up together, which is going to be an interesting road to be able to follow for the company. One of the things that Phil talked about is how companies are using and how they're thinking about AI agents. There's a lot of discussion happening right now around agentic AI, what it is, what it isn't, how it gets used. There are a lot of questions amongst customers, like, what does this really mean and how can I really take advantage of it? And one of the things that I found really interesting from Phil's keynote presentation was that he was talking about how AI agents will serve your customers. So just imagine you've just like a human agent, you have digital agents that will respond to customers. They could be your customers. And I thought that was an interesting statement, and I'll come back to that in a minute. And they can also work for you. And we're starting to see some of this, right, with personal agents, where the agent itself is doing work while you're off doing something completely different. Agentic AI has a lot of potential, but there are some things that enterprises are gonna have to work through, such as governance and data prep. And Cognigy is working through some of those challenges with customers, obviously. One of the things that he talked about was how they're moving AI from defining processes to orchestrating outcomes. And this statement really resonated with me. And the reason why is when I talk to CIOs, when I talk to customers, they're focused on outcomes. Whether it's a black box, AI, some other black magic, they don't care really. What they care about is how the work gets done, but more importantly, what is the outcome? What is it that we're organized for? What is it that we are driving toward in terms of that outcome? And one of the things I thought was interesting from Phil's presentation was that they're making that move from just taking a process, making it more efficient, and moving more toward orchestrating a specific outcome. I think you were going to see more of that as we go through time, not just from Cognigy and NiCE, but also from others that are stepping into the agentic space. Cognigy is wanting to aspire to be that agentic operating layer for CX. Now, it's important to understand what that means, but on the surface, it's taking all of the human interactions and digital interactions and being able to leverage them both. Because when you start to think about how these interactions happen, it's not a discrete customer interacts with a human or interacts with a digital agent, but rather you could be interacting with the digital agent, have the digital agent get stuck or get to a point where it can't answer the question, and then move that over to a human agent to be able to address as part of an escalation or a change. One of the other pieces to this is, and this is something that they demoed, was being able to take a digital agent and say, okay, I can't answer this particular question. Instead of taking that conversation and passing it to a human agent, imagine that the digital agent is actually able to interact with a human agent on the back channel and say, hey, I can't answer this question. What should I do? How should I respond to it? And then a human can infuse their comments into the response, and then the digital agent picks up and takes over from there. And that becomes a matter of efficiency, because it's not just saying, okay, when you go down a path of interactions with digital agents, if you get stuck, then we have to go to a human agent. That's not a really good scalable approach over time as we start to see the increase in these interactions. But rather, if we can maybe help the agent, the digital agent along, that becomes more advantageous. So it was interesting to see how they're thinking about that. You know, they're focused from a platform perspective. They're focused on proactive engagement, not just with the agents, but also moving into automation and figuring out, okay, so how are we interacting with customers, whether that's from a human perspective or a digital perspective? How do we start to learn from those interactions and then create automation to help the next interaction? And so that learning piece of learning from humans and also learning from AI interactions, I think is going to be a really powerful edge for the Cognigy and NiCE team. One of the things that they did kind of walk us through was they have a way that they think about what they call the agentic learning loop. And it started with, you evaluate the conversations, you deploy agents to be able to address those conversations, you observe the agents because you want to understand, are they addressing the problem? Are they kind of running amok? So there's an assessment piece to this. And then you want to be able to improve it. One of the things that's new that they're starting to move to is they have technology now that they are able to go in and, as I mentioned, observe those interactions, whether it's human or AI, be able to use that to create those agents and then evaluate them and deploy them. And the evaluation process is interesting because they're not just doing the evaluations, but they can actually do simulation of agents. So now you're able to say, I want an agent to be able to respond in certain ways. You're actually able to simulate those agents and figure out what's the most effective way for agents to operate and what are the right guardrails I need to put in place. And so, again, another really interesting approach that they're taking, but I think a really powerful protection mechanism as well. So now if you don't have an agentic platform in place, now what you can do is put this in place, learn the interactions, and of course they're starting with CX1 and the interactions that come from NiCE CX1. But they mentioned on stage that if you aren't with CX1 today, they'd still love to talk to you about ways that they might be able to ingest that into this learning process. And so the idea is observe what you're already doing, what your human agents are already doing. Use that as a foundational building block to determine how to build the digital agents as you start to build out your platform. They talked about the brand new interface, and this is something I'm starting to see from a number of different companies, and I'll have some more comments on this in future posts. I have been visible to a number of us in terms of how this interface is changing. Instead of just a simple search box, now it's just put in your question. Don't go necessarily through the IVR. Don't necessarily go through a series of questions to be able to ascertain who you are, what you're trying to do. I can just think of examples just in the last week where I've had to call into a call center and I'm trying to say I need to make a change to an order, and it comes back and says, oh, so you want to place a new order? Or no, I want to make a change to an order. Oh, you want to delete your order. The point is, you don't go through that frustration. You have one interface, one single interface, and that interface is now AI. And then it knows on the back end who you are, why you might be calling. So this gets to the proactive aspects, and then also how to be able to address your issue appropriately. Something else they talked about was the concept of sub-agents. And I know I've talked quite a bit about this with customers and executive teams on just how sub-agents work within an agentic framework. And what was interesting is how the Cognigy team is taking sub-agents and using that with integrations to third-party systems to be able to not just ingest data in from a knowledge standpoint, but also be able to interact with other systems. That's going to be really attractive for enterprises where their human agents might have several screens up or several logins set up. And the agent, when you move to a digital experience, also needs access to those systems to be able to address similar types of activities. And so they're looking at that through a process using sub-agents and integrations right out of the box. I mentioned the knowledge piece. They understand that in order to be effective or to be more effective, the more knowledge you have, the better off you can be and the better experience you can provide. And so it was really impressive to see how the NiCE Cognigy team is making those integrations into already existing data sets within the enterprise to be able to augment the agentic process. I mentioned about evaluations. The simulation aspect within Cognigy I thought was really interesting, especially if you are just getting started with agentic. There might be a little bit of apprehension, and I think that's totally normal. This is new technology that we're all experiencing for the first time. And so simulations become a way to kind of test things out and see how this is going to work, and then optimize accordingly before you actually deploy it into production. So rather than deploy something, test it, see how it works, optimize it, and then circle back around, now you can actually go through many more simulations of many more different types of scenarios without actually deploying it to production. And then you can optimize and deploy accordingly. I mentioned about the voice and the human interactions. I think this is going to become more of an issue and an opportunity for enterprises as we go forward, because depending on who you are, depending on the individual calling in or interacting with your company, and it depends on the situation. Someone may be more apt to pick up the phone and make a phone call at one point, or that might be an easier path for them. Or maybe bringing up a browser and interacting through an AI interface. So being able to context switch and also being able to augment those digital experiences with a human experience as opposed to just switching, I think will be really important, especially as I mentioned earlier how they were talking about AI serving the customer, but also being your customer. Um, and one of the statements that Phil had made is that your next customer may not be a human. And at first you think about that and you think, what the heck could he mean by that? And then when you start to see how they're thinking about it, it makes a lot of sense. So just imagine you have a company and you want to make your services available to other companies, whether that be a travel agency, whether that be another services type of business. Sure, there will be customers that will call in or interact to book a flight, book a hotel, make a change to that. But then there also might be other services that might need to use that function as a service. And so one of the things that the NiCE Cognigy team is doing is essentially using MCP, Model Context Protocol, to create that interface from your knowledge base, from your agentic platform, to be able to make it available to other third parties, should that be something you'd like to do. I think as we go through time, you're going to want to do that even within your organization. So you might have another system that becomes the primary interface, for example, for your employees. And that interface may be able to touch into your HCM system, maybe into your transaction system, but it also might want to engage with other systems that have a support component to it. So I think that that will be an interesting pathway that we'll see develop and mature over time. So those are some of the key aspects. I mentioned that go to this link and that'll get you the first comments that I had on the acquisition of Cognigy by NiCE back in July. I'll have a full write-up of this, but I just wanted to give some kind of key takeaways coming out of the conference. It's a really interesting move by NiCE to pick up Cognigy and how they're starting to infuse Cognigy into working alongside, not embedding where they're just essentially making it a function within CXone, but rather keeping them separate because they do work very uniquely, but at the same time leveraging the fact that, hey, it's all the same company. Let's figure out how do we get the context out of CXone, make it available within Cognigy, and then how do we leverage Cognigy within those CXone customers. So it'll be interesting to see how this evolves over time. I think Cognigy is definitely on a path that is leading the space, and there's going to be a lot more to discuss, especially as we get to learn about these interactions more fully, and we also start to think about how these interactions start to create complex interactions with other systems. And so we'll talk more about that later. But anyway, that's all for now from Munich. Just some quick thoughts, and I'd love to hear your thoughts as well. Definitely check out my website. So this is the link, the QR code there to the evoa.com website. I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you were at the conference, what did you think? And what are your thoughts on some of these moves by NiCE and Cognigy? So looking forward to engaging in that discussion, and we'll talk more soon.